Spring after spring, gardeners empty their wallets refilling the same pots with annuals, only to watch every single one of them die the moment frost hits. There is a better way. Perennials planted in containers this year can still be growing, still blooming, and still getting bigger 3, 4, even 5 years from now without spending another dime on replacements. On this channel, Senior's Gardening Advice, Sam is counting down the 20 best perennials for pots, plants chosen specifically because they thrive in confined roots, not just survive them. Some love full sun, others prefer shade, so no matter where the pots sit, there's a match on this list. Pay attention to the hardiness zones, mature sizes, and pairings mentioned along the way, since the right combination is what turns an ordinary pot into a show-stopping one. Let's count down from number 20 to number 1. Number 20, Creeping Phlox. Botanically known as Phlox subulata, Creeping Phlox is a mat-forming perennial hardy in zones 3 through 9, and it earns its spot at number 20 for one simple reason. Nothing else on this list puts on a spring show quite like it. In April and May, the entire plant disappears under a blanket of tiny star-shaped flowers in purple, pink, magenta, or white, so dense that the foliage barely shows through. It stays low, usually under 6 inches, which makes it a natural spiller trailing over the rim of a container. Once the bloom fades, the fine, needle-like evergreen foliage still holds its shape for the rest of the season, so the pot never looks bare or abandoned. It wants full sun and sharp drainage, and it genuinely dislikes wet feet, so a gritty potting mix with extra perlite worked in is worth the effort. Because it flowers so early, pair it with spring bulbs like species tulips or grape hyacinth planted underneath the mat. By the time the bulbs finish and their foliage starts to yellow, the phlox has already filled back in to hide the fading leaves. A light shearing right after flowering keeps the mat tight and compact and can trigger a smaller rebloom later in summer. A shallow, wide bowl-style container suits its trailing habit better than a tall, narrow pot. Number 19, Dianthus. Dianthus, commonly called garden pinks, is hardy from zones 3 to 9 depending on the variety, and it's one of the most fragrant plants a container can hold. The flowers are small, fringed, and clove-scented, blooming in white, pink, and red from late spring into early summer, with many modern reblooming varieties producing a second flush in fall if they're deadheaded consistently through the season. It stays genuinely compact, rarely topping 12 inches, which means it never outgrows its pot the way some larger perennials eventually do, so it can stay in the same container for years without repotting. Dianthus wants full sun and sharp, almost gravelly drainage. Heavy, moisture-retentive potting mix is its biggest enemy and the most common reason it fails in a pot. Once established, it's both deer-resistant and drought-tolerant, so it tolerates the occasional mist watering better than most flowering perennials, though it shouldn't be left bone-dry for extended stretches. Pair it with low-growing sedum or creeping thyme for a sunny container that essentially looks after itself all season, or tuck it at the front edge of a taller arrangement where its fragrance can be appreciated up close on a patio table or porch step. Number 18, Gaillardia. Gaillardia, or blanket flower, is hardy in zones 3 through 10 and holds one of the longest bloom seasons of any perennial on this list, throwing bold, daisy-like flowers in red, orange, and yellow, often blended together on a single bloom, from early summer all the way through hard frost. It wants full sun and lean, fast-draining soil, which happens to describe most potting mixes almost perfectly, making it exceptionally well-suited to container life straight out of the bag. Compact cultivars like Arizona Sun and Mesa Yellow stay around 10 to 12 inches, ideal for mixed pots where taller companions might otherwise overshadow it and block its light. The single most important maintenance task is deadheading spent blooms regularly. Skip it for even a couple of weeks, and flower production slows noticeably by midsummer. Pair Gaillardia with blue Salvia for a striking hot and cool color contrast, or with silvery lamb's ear to soften and balance its bold, fiery tones. It's also notably heat-tolerant compared to most flowering perennials, making it one of the more reliable performers in a pot that sits on a hot, sun-baked patio, deck, or balcony through the peak of summer. Number 17. Russian Sage. Perovskia atroplicifolia, better known as Russian sage, is hardy in zones 4 through 9 and brings height, movement, and a soft, silvery presence that few other container perennials can match. From midsummer into autumn, it sends up long, airy spikes of lavender blue flowers above finely cut, aromatic gray-green foliage that Relia says a sage-like scent whenever it's brushed against. It is one of the most drought-tolerant perennials available, genuinely thriving on neglect once its roots are established, which makes it forgiving for gardeners who occasionally forget to water for a week or two. Because it grows 3 to 4 feet tall, it works best as the dramatic thriller in a large, heavy pot, ideally one weighted enough not to tip over in wind given its height, with lower growing companions like Catmint or Sedum filling in around its base to hide the bare lower stems. Deer and rabbits leave it alone entirely, and bees and butterflies visit it constantly through the second half of the growing season, right when many earlier blooming plants have already finished. A hard cutback to a few inches in early spring, once new growth appears at the base, keeps it from getting leggy and woody over the years and encourages a fuller, bushier shape. Number 16. Ajuga. Ajuga, or bugleweed, is hardy down to zone 3 and is one of the few container perennials that genuinely prefers being confined rather than planted freely in a bed. In garden soil, Ajuga spreads aggressively by runners and can quickly overtake neighboring plants, but in a pot, that same vigor becomes an asset, producing a thick, glossy carpet of foliage in shades of deep bronze, burgundy, or variegated cream within a single growing season. Short spikes of blue flowers appear in spring, a welcome bonus stacked on top of foliage that already earns its keep for the rest of the year. It tolerates more shade than most spillers on this list, making it a dependable filler for pots that only receive a few hours of direct sun each day, and it stays attractive well into the cooler months of fall. Divide it every couple of years if the center starts looking patchy or bare, replanting the healthiest outer sections back into the same pot. Pair it with taller shade perennials like Hosta or Astilbe, letting the Ajuga spill over the container's edge as a living, textured skirt around their base. Number 15. Heuchera. Heuchera, or coral bells, is hardy in zones 4 through 9, and it's genuinely one of those rare plants that performs better in a container than it often does out in the open garden. The range of foliage color available now is extraordinary. Lime green, gold, caramel, burnt orange, deep burgundy, and near black, all held on compact mounds that rarely exceed 12 to 18 inches wide and tall. Older varieties preferred shade exclusively, but many newer cultivars tolerate considerably more sun, which has meaningfully expanded where Heuchera can be used across a mixed container garden. Delicate, wiry flower spikes appear in late spring and are popular with hummingbirds, but the real draw is the foliage itself, which provides months of color without needing a single bloom to earn its place. It pairs beautifully with ferns, hostas, and ornamental grasses in a shaded arrangement, or works perfectly well as a standalone specimen in its own smaller decorative pot on a shaded step. Well-drained, humus-rich potting mix and consistent moisture, without ever letting it stay soggy, keeps the crown healthy and prevents rot through winter. Number 14. Astilbe. Astilbe is hardy in zones 4 through 8 and solves a problem most shade containers genuinely struggle with, a total lack of strong vertical color. Feathery, fern-like foliage sits low at the base of the plant, and from it rise tall, dense plumes of tiny flowers in red, pink, purple, peach, or white, typically peaking in early to midsummer depending on the cultivar chosen. Even after the color itself fades, the dried plumes hold their shape and texture on the stem, extending visual interest well beyond the actual bloom period into late summer and even fall. Astilbe is genuinely thirsty compared to most perennials on this list, and responds enthusiastically to regular feeding. The more consistent the moisture and fertilizer schedule, the more impressive and full the bloom spikes become the following year. In a container, it pairs magnificently with Hosta and ornamental grasses, where the bold Hosta leaf, the fine grass blade, and the feathery Astilbe plume create three genuinely distinct textures that read as an intentionally designed arrangement, rather than a random collection of unrelated plants thrown together. Number 13. Japanese Painted Fern. Atherium nipponicum pictum, the Japanese painted fern, is hardy in zones 4 through 9 and brings a quality of elegance to shade containers that's hard to replicate with flowering plants alone. Its fronds carry silvery gray coloring brushed with burgundy and wine red along the central veins, giving the plant an almost hand-painted appearance that catches light beautifully whenever it's tucked into a shaded corner of a porch or patio. Because shade containers lean so heavily on foliage rather than blooms for their visual interest, having a fern in the mix guarantees there's always something worth looking at, regardless of what LSC is or isn't flowering in the pot that particular week. It's genuinely low maintenance once established, dying back cleanly and completely in winter, and returning reliably each spring with minimal fuss or attention required. It combines beautifully with virtually every other shade perennial on this list, particularly Heuchera and Hosta, where its fine, lacy texture contrasts sharply against their bolder, broader leaf shapes. Keep the soil consistently moist and situate it out of direct afternoon sun for the best, most vivid color development. Number 12. Hosta. Hosta is hardy in zones 3 through 9 and functions as the true cornerstone of the shade container garden. The plant most other shade perennials on this list are chosen to complement. The range of sizes, colors, and leaf patterns available is genuinely overwhelming in the best possible way. From tiny 6-inch miniatures suited to small pots up to giant cultivars with leaves the size of dinner plates that anchor an entire arrangement on their own. Solid blue-green, gold, cream-edged, and white-splashed variegated varieties all exist, and their lush, bold foliage anchors a container design, providing the visual backdrop everything else in the pot performs against for the rest of the season. In July and August, Hostas send up slender flower stalks topped with nodding, bell-shaped blooms in white or pale lavender, a lovely bonus stacked on top of already strong foliage. For gardeners who battle deer pressure, one of the most practical advantages of growing hostas in containers is simply keeping them elevated on a deck or patio, out of reach of browsing animals that would otherwise shred a ground-planted hosta down to bare stems overnight. Number 11. Lamb's Ear. Stachys byzantina, or lamb's ear, is hardy in zones 4 through 8, and is grown almost entirely for its extraordinary foliage rather than for any particular flower display. The leaves are large, thick, and covered in a dense layer of soft, silvery fuzz that genuinely invites touching, which makes it a long-time favorite in gardens visited by children or grandchildren who can't resist running a hand across it. The Helen von Stein variety is particularly well suited to containers, because it's a vigorous grower that stays attractive through the entire season and produces far fewer of the messy flower stalks that some older varieties send up in midsummer, which tend to flop and detract from the foliage. It provides striking color and texture contrast in a sunny pot, especially alongside deep purple Heuchera, hot pink Dianthus, or the spiky upright form of Salvia planted nearby. Deer and rabbits have essentially no interest in the fuzzy foliage, which makes lamb's ear a dependable, low-drama choice for gardeners dealing with consistent wildlife pressure around their patio or deck. Good drainage matters more than watering frequency here, since wet leaves sitting in humid weather can rot at the crown. Number 10. Compact Shrub Roses. Compact shrub roses, hardy anywhere from zone 4 to zone 9 depending on the specific cultivar chosen, are more achievable in containers than many gardeners assume after struggling with roses in the ground. Varieties bred specifically to stay 2 to 3 feet wide and tall rather than the sprawling hybrid teas of decades past, are genuinely well-suited to large pots on a patio or deck. Container growing actually offers some real advantages over garden beds: better control over drainage, the ability to reposition the plant for maximum sun exposure throughout the season, and improved air circulation around the base, which can meaningfully reduce fungal disease compared to roses crowded into a border with other shrubs. Choose disease-resistant, repeat-blooming cultivars for the easiest experience, since these require far less spraying and deadheading effort than older, fussier varieties. Underplant with catmint or sweet alyssum to hide bare lower stems, and add a soft skirt of color and fragrance at the base of the rose. A large container, at least 18 to 24 inches across and equally deep, is essential, since roses develop a substantial and thirsty root system that struggles badly in anything smaller. Number 9. Scabiosa. Scabiosa columbaria, sold widely under the name butterfly blue, is hardy in zones 3 through 8 and deserves considerably more attention than it typically receives from container gardeners. It produces lavender blue, pincushion-shaped flowers almost continuously from spring through fall, one of the longest bloom windows of any perennial on this entire list, rivaled only by Gaillardia and Coreopsis. It's also a genuine pollinator powerhouse, drawing bees, butterflies, and other beneficial insects in noticeable numbers throughout the growing season, arguably more consistently than several showier plants covered so far. Staying compact, rarely exceeding 12 inches in height, it fits comfortably into a mixed container either as a standalone accent in a smaller pot or paired with soft pie. NK Dianthus or silvery lamb's ear for contrast. Once established, it tolerates dry spells reasonably well, though it appreciates more consistent moisture than true drought specialists like Sedum or Russian sage further up this list. Regular deadheading is really the only maintenance it asks for, and in return, it rewards that small, repeated effort with nearly non-stop flowers for 6 months or more each year. Number 8. Ornamental Allium. The Millennium variety of Ornamental Allium is hardy in zones 4 through 9 and brings a sculptural quality to container gardening that few other perennials on this list can match. In midsummer, it produces perfectly round, rose-purple flower globes on upright stems roughly 18 inches tall, creating a striking geometric contrast against the softer, looser foliage of most companion plants surrounding it. Unlike spring-flowering bulb alliums that bloom early and then die back completely, leaving an awkward gap, Millennium keeps attractive strappy green foliage at its base through the season, so the pot never looks abandoned or half-finished once the flower globes fade. Pair it with pale yellow yarrow or achillea for a bold, sunny color combination, or with fall-blooming sedum so the display continues seamlessly as the allium's color starts to fade toward late summer. Pollinators find the globe-shaped flower heads almost impossible to resist. A container of blooming Millennium Allium in July will typically be visited by bees from morning until evening, making it a genuine asset for anyone hoping to actively support pollinators from a small patio or balcony space. Number 7. Lavender. Lavandula angustifolia, English lavender, is hardy in zones 5 through 9 and is arguably better suited to a container than to typical garden soil, since a pot makes it far easier to guarantee the sharp, fast drainage this Mediterranean native absolutely demands to survive. The reward for getting that drainage right is considerable. Intensely fragrant silvery foliage and dense purple flower spikes that perfume an entire patio or porch on a warm afternoon, especially when brushed against while walking past. Full sun is non-negotiable, and restrained watering matters just as much as light. Overwatering, not winter cold, is the single most common way gardeners lose lavender in a pot. A gritty, fast-draining mix, sometimes with extra perlite or coarse sand worked directly into it, closely mimics the rocky Mediterranean hillsides lavender evolved on over centuries. Light pruning immediately after the first flush of bloom encourages a tidier, denser shape, and often triggers a smaller second bloom later in the season. Pair it with roses or catmint for a romantic, cottage garden-inspired container arrangement, and consider cutting some of its dried flower spikes for indoor arrangements once the outdoor season winds down. Number 6. Echinacea. Echinacea, or purple coneflower, is hardy in zones 3 through 9, and while it's one of the most recognizable perennials in American gardens, it performs brilliantly in containers when the right, size-appropriate varieties are chosen from the start. Compact cultivars in the 18 to 24-inch range are the ones to select for pots, since the taller native species can reach 4 feet and quickly overwhelm the proportions of most standard containers within a couple of seasons. Coneflowers bloom for an extended stretch through summer, and unlike many perennials, their spent seed heads remain genuinely attractive well into autumn and winter, providing structural interest through the colder months while simultaneously feeding goldfinches and other seed-eating birds who visit the pot. Modern breeding has expanded the available color range considerably beyond the traditional pink, into white, yellow, orange, red, and deep magenta shades. Full sun and well-drained soil are its only real requirements, and once established, it tolerates both heat and drought with minimal complaint, making it one of the lowest maintenance flowering perennials covered anywhere on this entire list. Number 5. Nepeta. Nepeta, commonly known as catmint, is hardy in zones 3 through 8 and is one of the most versatile and forgiving perennials available for a sunny container garden. Its billowing, mounding habit naturally softens the hard, rigid edges of a pot, and its lavender-purple flowers bloom prolifically from late spring into summer without much intervention required. A quick trim after the first flush of blooms fades encourages a second, and sometimes even a third, wave of flowering that can carry the display well into fall on a healthy, established plant. The foliage carries a pleasant minty fragrance whenever it's brushed. Deer and rabbits generally avoid it entirely, and pollinators, particularly bees, visit it constantly throughout the growing season from spring through fall. Walker's Low remains the most widely available and reliable variety for container life, with a mature size around 18 to 24 inches, compact E. Enough for most pots while still providing real visual presence. It combines beautifully with daylilies, roses, and ornamental grasses, and its soft, mounding texture makes an excellent visual buffer between bolder, more structural plants in a mixed arrangement. Number 4. Sedum. Sedum, or stonecrop, technically reclassified by botanists as Hylolephium in many popular garden cultivars, is hardy in zones 3 through 9 and stands as one of the true workhorses of the sunny container garden. It's drought-tolerant, long-lived, and offers genuine structural interest across all 3 growing seasons, with pollinators going noticeably enthusiastic over its late-season blooms right when many other flowers in the garden have already finished for the year. Autumn Joy remains the classic container sedum, its thick, architectural rosettes attractive from the moment they emerge in spring, through their slowly developing flower heads across summer, all the way to the rust-colored dried seed heads that persist attractively straight through winter without collapsing. Hens and chick sedums add a sculptural, geometric quality to smaller companion pots, while the trailing variety Angelina cascades beautifully over a larger container's edge with chartreuse, needle-like foliage. Because sedum stores water in its fleshy leaves, it's remarkably forgiving of missed waterings, making it one of the best choices on this list for gardeners who travel often or simply prefer genuinely low-fuss, low-gilt plants. Number 3. Daylilies. Hemerocallis, the daylily, is hardy in zones 3 through 9 and remains among the most adaptable and forgiving perennials available to container gardeners of any skill level. It tolerates a genuinely wide range of conditions, requires minimal ongoing care once planted, and comes in a staggering range of flower colors, sizes, and bloom times to choose from. That last point is really the key to building an exceptional daylily container. By selecting 3 varieties an early season bloomer, a mid-season bloomer, and a late season bloomer. A continuous succession of flowers can be maintained from late spring all the way through early autumn, rather than settling for one short burst of color. Stella d'Oro, compact and covered in gold and yellow blooms, remains a dependable classic choice for pots of any size. Each individual flower lasts only a single day, hence the plant's common name, but a mature clump produces so many buds in sequence that the overall display never actually stops during its bloom window. Pair shorter ornamental grasses, like little bunny fountain grass, alongside daylilies, so that as the daylily foliage naturally starts to fade later in the season, the grass steps in to fill the visual gap left behind. Number 2. Salvia. Salvia nemorosa and its many garden hybrids are hardy in zones 4 through 8 and are essentially indispensable to any well-designed container garden, sun or otherwise. Its tall, upright flower spikes in shades of purple, blue, pink, and white provide the vertical accent that contrasts beautifully against the mounding and trailing habits of most other container perennials on this list. It blooms generously from late spring onward and responds to regular deadheading with repeated flushes of new flower spikes clear through to frost, making it one of the longest and most reliably performing plants covered today. Deer and rabbits leave it completely alone. It handles drought with real ease once its roots are established, and it's an exceptional pollinator plant, with bees and butterflies seeking it out constantly and predictably throughout the entire season. It pairs with practically everything else on this list, but its combination with Echinacea is particularly spectacular, since the spiky, vertical form of Salvia forms a natural backdrop against which the bold, round coneflower blooms really stand out and command attention. Number 1. Coreopsis. And the number 1 perennial for pots that comes back stronger every single year is Coreopsis. This cheerful, daisy-like perennial, hardy in zones 4 through 9, blooms from mid-spring all the way through fall with almost no effort required on the gardener's part, tolerating full sun and surprisingly dry conditions better than nearly anything else covered today on this entire list. The traditional moonbeam variety produces soft, pale yellow flowers that complement virtually any color scheme in a mixed container. But modern breeding has expanded the palette dramatically to include coral, peachy orange, deep red, and pink shades, along with striking bicolor forms that weren't widely available even a decade ago. Compact cultivars stay under 18 inches, making them genuinely ideal for pots of almost any size, from a small balcony planter to a large statement urn. Light, regular deadheading keeps the bloom count high through the entire growing season without much real effort. Pair Coreopsis with blue Salvia for a classic cottage combination, and add fall BL. Sedum for late season interest once summer winds down, and that single container will be performing beautifully from the first warm day of spring straight through to the first hard frost, coming back looking fuller and better every single year it returns. That's the full countdown, 20 perennials that reward the effort of planting them once by returning stronger, fuller, and more beautiful every single year, whether the pots sit in full sun, deep shade, or somewhere in between. Sam and the whole seniors gardening advice community would love to know which of these are already growing on your patio, and which ones are landing on this year's wish list, so drop a comment below. If this video helped, a like, a share with a fellow gardener, and a subscribe with the notification bell would mean a lot. Until next time, keep growing.